I stood at the altar in my charcoal suit, scanning the crowd for my parents. Empty seats. My fiancée Katie squeezed my hand, her smile wavering. 11 months ago, I gave them the date. 11 months of planning, saving, dreaming. But my brother Derek decided he wanted a European vacation the same weekend, and suddenly my wedding didn't matter anymore. They chose him. They always chose him. So I made a choice too. I got married anyway, and now they want me to feel guilty about it. Let me take you back 11 months. Katie and I had been together for 4 years when I finally worked up the courage to propose. We met at a tech conference in Austin, bonding over terrible conference coffee and a shared love of hiking. She was a marketing director with this infectious laugh that made everyone around her smile. I was a software engineer who'd spent most of my 20s building a career and trying to prove something to my family. The proposal happened at our favorite spot in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We'd hiked up to a lookout point we discovered on our second date, the place where the valley spreads out below you like a painting. The autumn leaves were just starting to turn, splashes of gold and crimson against the green. I'd been carrying the ring in my backpack for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. When Katie turned to take a photo of the view, I dropped to one knee behind her. She turned back around and just froze, her hand flying to her mouth. I remember how my voice shook when I asked her to marry me. She said yes before I even finished the sentence, tears streaming down her face. We sat on that overlook for 2 hours, just talking about our future, watching the sun set over the mountains. The first call I made was to my parents. I was so excited I could barely get the words out. My mom, Linda, answered on the third ring. I could hear the television in the background, some home renovation show she always watched. I told her I'd proposed, that Katie said yes, that we were engaged. There was a pause. Then she said congratulations, but her voice had that distracted quality it always had when something else was holding her attention. I heard my dad, Paul, say something in the background. Then my mom said, "Oh honey, that's wonderful. Your father says congratulations too." I pushed down the small disappointment that they didn't seem more excited. Maybe I'd caught them at a bad time. I told them we were thinking October 14th of next year for the wedding. My mom said that sounded nice. Then I heard another voice in the background. Derek. My younger brother was visiting them, apparently. Derek got on the phone, his voice booming with that easy charm he'd always had. He congratulated me, made a joke about Katie finally making an honest man out of me, then handed the phone back to Mom. The whole call lasted maybe 5 minutes. When I hung up, Katie could see something was off on my face, but I smiled and told her it was fine. They were just surprised, that's all. 3 days later, I sent an official email to my parents with all the details. The date was locked in, October 14th. We'd already talked to the venue, a beautiful vineyard about 2 hours from where Katie and I lived. The email had the date in bold letters, the location, everything they needed to save the date. My mom responded with a short message. "Sounds great, honey." Katie's parents had a completely different reaction. When we drove down to tell them in person the following weekend, her mother Sharon actually screamed with joy. Her father Tom shook my hand so hard I thought my arm might fall off, then pulled me into a bear hug. They wanted to know everything. They pulled out a calendar immediately, marked the date, started talking about hotels and guest lists, and whether we needed help with planning. Sitting at their kitchen table, watching them fuss over Katie and celebrate with us, I felt that familiar ache I'd carried since childhood. This was what parents were supposed to look like when their child got engaged. This was the enthusiasm, the joy, the presence I'd always wanted from my own family. Katie noticed me getting quiet. Later, when we were alone, she asked if I was okay. I told her about my family dynamics, something I didn't talk about much. How Derek had always been the golden child. How he dropped out of college twice and my parents funded his gap year in Southeast Asia. How he was 25 now, still living rent-free in their basement, still figuring himself out. Meanwhile, I'd put myself through college with scholarships and 3 different part-time jobs. I bought my first car with money I'd saved from working at a call center. When I graduated and got my first real job, I'd called my parents excited to share the news. My mom had said that was nice, then spent 15 minutes telling me about Derek's new idea to start a food truck business. The food truck never materialized, of course. None of Derek's ideas ever did. Katie held my hand and said something that stuck with me. She said that their approval didn't define my worth, but I could tell she hurt for me. She'd grown up with parents who showed up for everything, who celebrated every achievement, who made her feel seen. She couldn't quite understand what it was like to always come second, but she tried. I pushed those feelings aside and focused on the wedding planning. Katie and I spent the next few months picking out flowers, tasting cakes, choosing music. Her parents were involved in every step, offering opinions and help and genuine excitement. My parents sent a few texts asking how planning was going, but they never asked for details or offered to help. I told myself it was fine. I was 28 years old, financially independent, marrying the woman of my dreams. I didn't need my parents' validation anymore. But deep down, I still wanted them there. I still wanted them to care. 6 months before the wedding, in April, I drove up to my parents' house for our monthly Sunday dinner. It was a tradition I'd maintained despite everything. This stubborn hope that maybe if I kept showing up, they'd eventually see me. Their house sat at the end of a quiet suburban street, the same house I'd grown up in. Derek's beat-up sedan was parked in the driveway, which meant he was home. Dinner was pot roast, my mom's usual Sunday meal. Derek sat across from me, talking about his latest plan. He'd decided he wanted to go backpacking through Europe. My dad was leaning forward, asking questions about which countries, how long, what he'd need. My mom was nodding along, smiling at Derek's enthusiasm. Then Derek said something that made my stomach drop. He mentioned he was thinking of going in October. The word hung in the air for a second. I set down my fork carefully. I reminded everyone that my wedding was in October. October 14th, specifically. I'd told them almost 6 months ago. I'd sent the email. Derek looked up, like he was trying to remember. "Oh, right," he said. "What date exactly?" I repeated it slowly. "October 14th. Derek paused, his fork halfway to his mouth, then shrugged. "Well, I haven't booked anything yet, so no worries." My mom quickly changed the subject, asking me to pass the potatoes. My dad went back to his food. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. I helped my mom with the dishes afterward, trying to find a moment to talk to her alone. I mentioned the wedding again, asked if she and Dad had looked at hotels near the venue yet. She waved a soapy hand. "Oh, honey, we'll figure it out. There's plenty of time." I offered to send her a list of recommended hotels, places with good rates. She said sure, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. Through the doorway, I could see my dad and Derek at the kitchen table. My dad's laptop open between them, looking at European hostels together. I drove home that night with my hands tight on the steering wheel. Katie was already in bed when I got back, but she woke up when she heard me come in. She took one look at my face and asked what happened. I told her about Derek's Europe trip, about my parents' enthusiasm for his plans versus their indifference about our wedding. I told her I felt invisible. Katie pulled me close and suggested I have a direct conversation with them, lay out exactly how important this was to me. I agreed. I'd talk to them soon. I'd make them understand. But even as I said it, part of me already knew how it would go. 2 months passed. It was June now, 4 months before the wedding. Katie and I had our invitations printed, the guest list finalized, the menu selected. Everything was falling into place, except for my parents. I'd been putting off the conversation Katie suggested, telling myself I was busy with work, with wedding planning, with life. But really, I was scared. Scared that if I pushed them, they'd confirm what I'd always suspected, that I didn't matter as much as Derek did. Finally, I made myself pick up the phone. It was a Saturday morning. I called my mom's cell, trying to sound casual. She answered while she was at the grocery store. I could hear the beeping of scanners in the background, the murmur of other shoppers. I told her I wanted to talk about the wedding, that it was really important to me that they be there. I asked them to block out the whole weekend, not just the day. Save the date. Make it a priority. My mom's voice got that reassuring tone she used when she wanted to end a conversation. "Of course, sweetheart. We will. I'm so excited." I asked if she wanted to be involved in any of the planning, if she had thoughts about the parent dances, if Dad wanted to give a speech. There was a pause. Then she said she'd think about what to wear. In the background, I heard my dad say something. Mom told me Dad would check his work calendar. I hung up feeling hollow. But I told myself it was progress. They'd acknowledged the wedding. They'd said they were coming. That was something. 2 weeks later, I was at my desk at work when my phone buzzed with a group text. It was from Derek. The message opened with his typical casual energy. He'd booked his Europe trip, 3 weeks, 7 countries. He'd attached flight confirmations and a detailed itinerary he must have spent hours putting together. My eyes went straight to the dates. October 7th through October 28th. My wedding was October 14th. Right in the middle of his trip. I stared at my phone screen, reading the dates over and over. Sure, I was misunderstanding. But there it was, clear as day. Derek had booked a 3-week vacation that completely overlapped with my wedding. The wedding I'd announced 11 months ago. The wedding we'd just talked about at Sunday dinner 2 months ago. The wedding I'd specifically mentioned when Derek first brought up his October plans. My hands were shaking when I stepped outside to call him. He answered on the second ring, sounding cheerful. I asked him if he'd seen the dates of his trip. He said yeah. He'd gotten an amazing deal, almost 40% off. I took a breath and reminded him, very carefully, that my wedding was October 14th. There was a pause. Then Derek said, "Oh man, seriously?" Like he'd just remembered he had a dentist appointment or something. Not like he was missing his only brother's wedding. I asked him how he could forget. He said it just slipped his mind. Things had been hectic. He'd been focused on finding good flight prices. Then he said the thing that made my blood go cold. "The tickets are non-refundable, man. I already paid for everything." I stood there in the parking lot of my office building, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I was hearing. I told him that everything for my wedding was also non-refundable. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, the band. We'd put down deposits months ago. Guests had already booked hotels and flights. Derek's voice got defensive. "I mean, it's just a party, right? You could do it another weekend. Just a party." My wedding was just a party. I told him no, absolutely not. We were not moving our wedding date because he couldn't be bothered to check a calendar. Derek's tone shifted, got harder. He said I was being selfish, that he'd already committed to this trip, that it was just one day. Just one day, I repeated. My wedding day. He said I was making a big deal out of nothing, that I always had to be so uptight about everything, that I couldn't just be flexible for once. I felt something break inside me. I hung up without saying goodbye. My next call was to my parents. I needed them to see how insane this was. Surely they'd understand. They'd tell Derek he needed to cancel or reschedule. They'd back me up, my mom answered. Her voice had that careful quality that told me she already knew what I was calling about. I explained the situation as calmly as I could. I laid out the timeline. I'd announced my wedding date 11 months ago. Derek had just booked his trip 2 weeks ago. My wedding date hadn't changed. I waited for her to be outraged on my behalf. Instead, she sighed. "Well, honey, Derek already bought the tickets. They were non-refundable." I felt like I'd been punched. I reminded her that I'd given them the date first. 11 months ago, Derek had known about the wedding when he booked his trip. This wasn't a scheduling conflict. This was a choice. My mom got that pleading tone in her voice. "I know, sweetheart, but mistakes happen. Maybe you could move the wedding to November. It would still be beautiful. And then we could all be there." The parking lot seemed to tilt under my feet. I asked to speak to my father. Mom handed the phone over without argument. My dad's voice was firm, already defensive. He said Derek had made a commitment, that he'd already paid for the trip, that these things happen. He said I was established, successful, that I'd have other opportunities for family time. He said Derek needed this trip for his mental health, to find direction in his life. I asked the question directly. "Are you coming to my wedding or not?" The pause that followed felt like an eternity. Then my dad said, "We've already committed to helping Derek with this trip. We promised we'd contribute financially." Something in my chest cracked wide open. I said, "You committed to my wedding 11 months ago." My dad's voice got sharp. "Don't be dramatic, Rufus. You're making this harder than it needs to be. We're not saying we don't want to be there. were saying the timing didn't work out. I hung up. I didn't yell, didn't argue further. I just ended the call and stood there in the parking lot, watching cars drive past, feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath me. When I got home that evening, Katie knew immediately something was wrong. I told her everything, every word of the conversations. She went very still as she listened, her face getting paler and paler. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Uninvite them." I looked at her, surprised. She wasn't usually the type to cut people off, but her eyes were blazing. "They don't deserve to be there," she said. "They made their choice. You don't owe them anything." I wanted to agree. Part of me did agree. But another part, the little kid who'd spent his whole life trying to earn his parents' love, still hoped they'd change their minds. Still believed that maybe if I waited, if I gave them time, they'd realize what they were doing and choose me. Katie saw it on my face. She didn't push. She just held me while I tried to figure out how I'd gotten to a place where my own parents would rather fund my brother's vacation than attend my wedding. Over the next 6 weeks, my phone stayed silent. No calls from my parents, no apologies. Just a few text messages asking if I'd calmed down yet, if I was ready to be reasonable. Each message felt like a slap. Katie's parents noticed that my parents still hadn't sent in their RSVP cards. Sharon pulled Katie aside one afternoon and asked if everything was okay. Katie explained the situation. I wasn't there for the conversation, but Katie told me later that her mother went pale, then angry, then sad. She offered to call my parents herself, to try to talk some sense into them. I told Katie to thank her mom, but this was my battle. I had to handle it myself. August arrived, 2 months before the wedding. The summer heat pressed down heavy and thick. Katie and I were in full preparation mode, confirming final details with vendors, addressing invitations, organizing seating charts. We still had 2 empty seats where my parents should sit. I hadn't spoken to them since that awful phone call in June. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Part of me kept expecting them to call, to apologize, to say they'd figured it out and they'd be there. But my phone stayed quiet. Then, one evening in mid-August, my mom called. I almost didn't answer. Katie and I were making dinner, chopping vegetables together in our little kitchen, music playing softly in the background. When I saw Mom's name on the screen, my whole body tensed. Katie looked at me, a question in her eyes. I nodded and stepped out onto our balcony to take the call. Dinner was pot roast, my mom's usual Sunday meal. Derek sat across from me, talking about his latest plan. He'd decided he wanted to go backpacking through Europe. My dad was leaning forward, asking questions about which countries, how long, what he'd need. My mom was nodding along, smiling at Derek's enthusiasm. Then she said, "We've decided to stick with Derek's trip." The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. I gripped the balcony railing, looking out at the street below, watching cars pass by full of people living normal lives where their parents actually cared about them. My mom kept talking. She said Derek really needed their support right now, that he was going through a fragile time, that this trip was important for his growth. Then she suggested something that made my jaw clench. "What if you and Katie did a small ceremony now? Just the 2 of you. And then when we get back from Europe, we could have a real celebration. A big party where everyone could come? A real celebration. As if my actual wedding wasn't real. As if the ceremony Katie and I had spent a year planning, the event we'd invested thousands of dollars in, the day we'd invited 150 people to witness, was just a practice run." I asked her, my voice very quiet, "What's a real celebration if my parents aren't at my actual wedding?" My mom's voice got teary. She said I was being unfair, that I was putting her in an impossible position, that she was trying to find a compromise. I felt something shift inside me, something that had been bending for 28 years, finally reaching its breaking point. I said, "You put yourself in this position, Mom. I gave you 11 months' notice." She started to cry then, real tears I could hear over the phone. She said Derek didn't plan this to hurt me, that it just worked out this way, that sometimes life throws these scheduling conflicts at families and we all have to be understanding. I couldn't stop myself. I asked her how it was just a scheduling conflict when Derek booked his trip 6 months after I announced my wedding date. How was that not intentional? My mom made excuses. Derek was forgetful. He was going through things. He had a lot on his mind. He didn't mean to create this conflict. I asked her the question that had been burning in my chest for weeks. What about what I'm going through? This is one of the biggest days of my life. There was a pause. Then my mom said something I'll never forget. Her voice was gentle, almost pitying. You have Katie. You have her family. You'll be fine without us for one day. Something broke in me at that moment. Clean and final, like a bone snapping. All those years of trying to be good enough, trying to earn their attention, trying to matter to them. And in one sentence, she'd confirmed what I'd always feared. I didn't need them because I had other people. Derek needed them because he had nobody else. I was fine. I would always be fine, because I'd learned how to be fine without them. My voice came out steady and cold. You're right. I will be fine. I've been fine without you my whole life. My mom gasped. I heard her crying harder, but I kept going. Go to Europe. Enjoy your trip with Derek. I'm getting married on October 14th, with or without you. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt strangely calm. Through the glass door, I could see Katie in the kitchen, watching me with concern. I walked back inside. Before I could say anything, my phone rang again. My dad this time. I answered. He was angry. Not disappointed or concerned. Angry. He said I'd been cruel to my mother, that I'd made her cry, that I had no right to speak to her that way. I almost laughed. I said, I was being honest. There's a difference. My dad said they'd always supported me. I did laugh then, a bitter sound that surprised even me. I asked him when. When had they ever put me first? When had they ever chosen me over Derek? He couldn't answer. He blustered about how I was being ungrateful, how they'd raised me, how I owed them respect. I felt years of suppressed frustration rising up. I paid for my own college, I said. I bought my own car. I built my own life. What exactly should I be grateful for? My dad's voice got cold. We raised you. That's what. Barely, I said. The word came out hard and true. You raised me barely. And you know it. Derek got your attention, your money, your time. I got whatever was left over. My dad was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in a voice like ice, if that's how you feel, maybe it's better we don't come to your wedding. There it was. The truth finally spoken out loud. I felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe it is, I said. The call ended. I set my phone down on the counter. Katie was there immediately, her arms around me. I expected to feel devastated. Instead, I felt lighter. The pretending was over. The hoping was over. They'd made their choice clear, and I'd finally accepted it. I told Katie I was done hoping they'd change, done waiting for them to care, done pretending it didn't hurt. She held me and told me she was proud of me. We decided right then to move forward and focus on the people who actually showed up for us. Over the next few weeks, I felt that lightness grow. It was grief, I realized later. I was grieving the parents I'd wished I had, letting go of that fantasy so I could accept reality. And reality was that I was marrying an incredible woman, surrounded by people who genuinely loved us. My parents' absence would hurt, but it wouldn't ruin anything. They'd already been absent my whole life. Their physical presence at the wedding wouldn't have changed that. Katie and I made a decision together. We'd honor those empty seats in our own way, not with bitterness, but with acknowledgement. We ordered a small framed photo of me as a child, maybe 7 years old, smiling at the camera. We'd place it where my parents would have sat. A representation of the son they could have celebrated but chose not to. The wedding was going to be perfect. Not despite their absence, but regardless of it. September came and went in a blur of final preparations. Dress fittings and tux adjustments, last-minute menu changes, confirming song lists with the band. Katie's parents were there for everything, filling the space my parents had left empty. Sharon helped Katie with her veil, offering the kind of mother-daughter moment I'd wanted my mom to have with Katie. Tom asked me about my vows, gave me advice about marriage, treated me like the son he'd gained. I watched these interactions with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. This was what it was supposed to look like. This was what I'd missed my entire life. Derek sent one text message in early September. Just 5 words. "You're really doing this?" I didn't respond. My parents sent nothing. No calls, no messages, no last-minute change of heart. Their silence was its own answer. Katie asked me several times if I was okay, if I was sure I didn't want to reach out one more time. I told her I was certain. They'd made their priorities clear. I wasn't going to beg them to care about me anymore. The week before the wedding, Katie's uncle Larry pulled me aside. Larry was Tom's brother, a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes who'd been welcoming to me from the moment we met. He'd heard about my situation with my parents through family conversations. "I know I'm not your father," he said, "but if you'd like someone to stand with you, someone in your corner, I'd be honored." I felt my throat get tight. I thanked him and told him I'd think about it. That night, I talked to Katie about it. She thought it was a beautiful gesture. She reminded me that family wasn't just blood. It was the people who chose to show up. I called Larry the next day and accepted his offer. October 14th arrived on a perfect autumn morning. The vineyard was stunning, rows of grapevines stretching out in every direction, the leaves turning gold and amber in the early fall. The weather cooperated beautifully, cool enough to be comfortable, sunny enough to be bright. Katie and I had decided to get ready separately, honoring that old tradition. I stood in a small room at the venue with my groomsmen, 3 friends from college who'd been there for me through everything. They knew about my parents. They'd offered to slash Derek's tires, which made me laugh even though they were probably only half joking. As I adjusted my tie in the mirror, I thought about my parents. They were probably in Rome right now, or maybe Barcelona, managing whatever crisis Derek had inevitably created, not thinking about me at all. I took a breath and let it go. Today wasn't about them. It was about Katie and me, about the life we were building together. The ceremony started at 4 in the afternoon. I walked out to the altar with Larry beside me, his hand on my shoulder. The guests were already seated, a sea of friendly faces. And there, in the 3rd row where my parents should have been, was that small framed photo of 7-year-old me. Katie's idea, executed perfectly. Not bitter or angry, just honest. The music changed. Katie appeared at the end of the aisle with both her parents. We decided together that Sharon and Tom would both walk her down, a symbol of partnership. Katie looked breathtaking in her dress, her face glowing with joy. As she walked toward me, I felt every ounce of stress and hurt from the past year melt away. This moment was ours, pure and perfect, and ours. The ceremony itself was intimate and meaningful. Our officiant was a friend from Katie's work, someone who knew us well and could speak to our relationship with authenticity. When it came time for vows, I'd written mine longhand, spent weeks getting them right. I talked about finding Katie, about how she'd shown me what it meant to be truly chosen. I talked about building a family based on love and presence, not obligation. I promised to always choose her first, to show up for her the way she'd shown up for me. My voice cracked on the last line, but I got through it. Katie's vows echoed mine. She promised to be my safe place, my constant, my home. She said that loving me had taught her that family was something you created, not just something you were born into. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. When the officiant pronounced us married, the cheer that went up from our guests was deafening. I kissed my wife for the first time as her husband, and everything else fell away. The reception was joyful and loud and perfect. We'd hired a band that played everything from jazz standards to classic rock. The food was incredible, wine flowing freely from the vineyard's own production. I danced with Katie, with her mother, with my new mother-in-law who whispered that she was so happy to officially have me as family. Larry gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying. He talked about chosen family, about the courage it takes to build your own path. He raised his glass to Katie and me, to new beginnings, to love that shows up. Not once during the entire day did I check my phone. Not once did I let myself think about my parents. I was fully present, fully joyful, fully alive in a way I'd never been before. We left for our honeymoon the next morning, a week in a cabin in the mountains, the same range where I'd proposed. Just us, the trees, the quiet. No phones, no social media, no outside world, just peace. When we got back a week later, reality was waiting. I had 37 missed calls from my mother, 17 voicemails, text messages from both parents and Derek filling my notification screen. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through them. Derek's Europe trip had apparently been a disaster. He'd gotten food poisoning in Paris, spent 2 days violently ill in a hostel bathroom. In Barcelona, his wallet was stolen with all his cards and his passport. My parents had to wire him money and spend hours on the phone with the embassy. In Rome, he'd gotten into a screaming argument with his hostel roommates over noise complaints and nearly gotten kicked out. My parents had spent 3 weeks managing crisis after crisis. Their dream trip turned into a nightmare of stress and frustration. They were back now, and they'd seen the wedding photos. Katie's cousin had posted pictures on social media. Beautiful shots of the ceremony, the reception, Katie and me laughing together. The photos were everywhere, tagged and shared and commented on. My parents had seen them all. Seen that we'd gotten married without them. Seen that the day had been beautiful and perfect, despite their absence. My mother's voicemails were frantic, her voice high and tearful. She couldn't believe we'd actually gone through with it. She'd thought surely we'd postpone, we'd wait for them, we'd understand. How could I get married without my own mother there? How could I do this to them? My father's messages were angry. He accused me of being spiteful, of purposely excluding them, of using the wedding as a weapon to hurt them. He said I'd embarrassed them in front of everyone, that people were asking questions about why they weren't there. Derek had sent one text. "Dude, you really got married without mom and dad? That's cold." I showed everything to Katie. She read through the messages, her expression moving from disbelief to anger to something like grim satisfaction. "They actually thought you'd wait for them," she said. "After everything they said, after choosing Derek's trip, they really thought you'd just postpone your wedding." I didn't know how to feel. Part of me felt vindicated. They'd chosen Derek, and it had blown up in their faces. Their trip was miserable, and they'd missed something irreplaceable. There was justice in that, but another part of me just felt sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that even now, faced with the consequences of their choice, their first instinct was to blame me. Katie asked what I wanted to do. I told her honestly. I didn't know. I needed time to process, so I didn't respond to any of the messages. Not that day, not that week. I let them sit with their choices the same way they'd let me sit with mine. 2 weeks passed before my parents finally reached out with a different approach. Not voicemails or text messages, but a formal request to meet in person. The message came from my father's email, written with the careful language of someone trying to sound reasonable. They wanted to talk, to explain, to work things out. "Could we please meet?" Katie asked if I wanted her there. I said yes immediately. I wasn't doing this alone. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our place and theirs. The meeting was set for a Saturday afternoon. I barely slept the night before. Katie held my hand in the dark and asked what I was afraid of. I told her the truth, that they'd make me feel guilty, that they'd twist everything around until somehow I was the bad guy, that they'd make me doubt myself. Katie squeezed my hand and reminded me of what was true. They'd had 11 months. They'd made their choice. Nothing they said could change that. We arrived at the cafe first. It was one of those trendy places with exposed brick and hanging plants, the kind of spot that served overpriced lattes and artisan sandwiches. We grabbed a table in the back corner. I ordered coffee I didn't drink, just held the warm mug in my hands. My parents arrived 10 minutes late. My mother looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. My father looked stern, his jaw set in that way that meant he was prepared for a fight. Derek wasn't with them, which was somehow both a relief and a disappointment. They sat down across from us. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then my mother broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. "How could you do this to us?" Her voice was thick with emotion. "How could you get married without your own parents?" I'd prepared myself for this. I kept my voice level. "Do what exactly?" My mother looked at me like I was being intentionally cruel. "Get married. Have your wedding. We wanted to be there." I took a breath. "I gave you 11 months' notice. You chose Derek's vacation." My father jumped in, his voice hard. "We thought you'd wait. We thought you'd understand that Derek needed us more." The words hung in the air. Katie's hand found mine under the table. I said quietly, I needed you too. It was my wedding. My mother reached for a tissue from her purse. But you're so independent. You have Katie. You have her family. Derek has nobody. There it was. The same logic they'd used before. I was fine, so I didn't need them. Derek was struggling, so he needed them more. As if need was a competition. As if love was a finite resource that had to be rationed. I felt Katie stiffen beside me. Before I could respond, she spoke up. Her voice was respectful but firm. With all due respect, you both made a choice. Rufus told you the wedding date almost a year in advance. Derek booked his trip 6 months later. There was no confusion about priorities. My father turned to Katie, his expression defensive. You don't understand our family dynamics. Katie didn't flinch. I understand that Rufus deserved better. My mother's face crumpled. She looked at Katie with something like betrayal. You turned him against us. I felt anger flash through me. Katie didn't do anything except love me the way you should have. The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I didn't take them back. They were true. My mother was crying in earnest now. My father put his arm around her, shooting me a look that was pure accusation. Like I was the one hurting her. Like I was the one who'd caused all of this. I pulled out my phone. I'd prepared for this too. I'd made a list, documented every major moment they'd missed or minimized in my life. I started reading it out loud. My high school graduation. They'd left early because Derek had a baseball game. I'd given the valedictorian speech and they'd missed half of it. My college acceptance to my dream school. They'd barely reacted because Derek had announced that same day that he was dropping out of his college. All their attention went to managing that crisis. My first real job offer after graduation. I'd called excited to tell them. They'd said congratulations and then spent 20 minutes telling me about Derek's new apartment search, asking if I could help him move. My promotion to senior developer 2 years ago. I'd called to share the news. They'd forgotten to call me back. When I'd followed up 3 days later, my mom said, "Oh yes, that's wonderful, honey," then changed the subject. There were more. So many more. A lifetime of moments where I'd been an afterthought. When I finished reading, I looked up. My mother looked uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. My father looked defensive, his mouth pressed into a thin line. I gave you one more chance, I said. One more opportunity to show up for me. And you chose Derek. Again. My mother's voice was small. He needed us. He was struggling. I felt something snap. I've been struggling my whole life for your attention. You just never noticed. Katie spoke again, her voice steady. Rufus told you the date almost a year in advance. Derek booked his trip knowing the wedding was that weekend. You both made a choice about whose needs mattered more. My father's face was red now. You have no right to speak to us this way. You don't know what it's like to have a child who needs more support. Katie's response was quiet, but cutting. I know what it's like to watch someone I love be treated like they don't matter by the people who should love them most. My mother turned to her, tears streaming. You turned him against us. Before you, he was fine with our family. Katie shook her head. Before me, he was alone. There's a difference. I stood up. I couldn't sit there anymore. Couldn't listen to them make excuses and shift blame. I pulled out the wedding photos I'd brought, the professional prints we'd just received. I set them on the table in front of my parents. This is what you missed, I said. Not because you couldn't be there, because you chose not to be. My mother reached for the photos with shaking hands. She looked at the first one, a shot of Katie and me at the altar, smiling at each other like nothing else existed. Her face crumpled again. We wanted to see this, she whispered. We wanted to be part of it. I picked up my coffee cup, set it down again. Then you should have been there. You had 11 months to make it a priority. My father stood too, his chair scraping loudly. If you're just going to keep blaming us, there's no point in this conversation. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd taught me to ride a bike but never came to my track meets, who'd helped me with math homework but never attended my academic awards ceremonies, who'd been physically present but emotionally absent my entire life. I'm not blaming you, I said. I'm holding you accountable. There's a difference. My mother looked up at me, mascara running down her cheeks. So what now? You're just going to cut us out of your life? The question hung heavy. I thought about it, really thought about it. Part of me wanted to say yes, to walk away clean and never look back. But that wasn't quite right either. I'm not cutting you out, I said slowly. I'm accepting reality. You've always cut me out. You just didn't notice, because I kept showing up anyway. My father's voice was cold. This is ridiculous. You're being childish. I grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair. Katie stood with me, her hand finding mine. I'm being honest, I said. And I'm done apologizing for wanting my parents to care about me. My mother reached out like she might grab my arm. We do care. I looked at her hand, hovering in the air between us. Then why does it only look like caring when you're defending yourselves? I put the wedding photos back on the table, spread them out so my parents could see them all. The ceremony, the first dance, Katie and me cutting the cake, laughing with friends, dancing with her parents. Every moment they'd chosen to miss. This is what you gave up, I said quietly. Not because of a scheduling conflict, because Derek wanted something and you couldn't tell him no. You've never been able to tell him no, and I'm done being the one who pays for that. Katie and I walked out together. Behind us, I heard my mother crying harder, my father saying something in a low, angry voice. I didn't look back. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm. Katie wrapped her arms around me. I was shaking, adrenaline flooding my system. But underneath the shaking was something else. Something that felt like strength. I'm proud of you, Katie said into my shoulder. That took courage. I held her tight and let myself feel everything. The grief, the anger, the relief, the sadness. All of it at once. A complicated tangle of emotions that would take time to sort through. But underneath it all was a certainty I'd never felt before. I'd told them the truth. I'd stood up for myself. I'd stopped pretending their neglect was somehow my fault. And that was worth everything. The weeks after that confrontation were strange. I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I'd finally said everything I'd needed to say. Heavier because I was grieving. Not for the relationship I'd lost, but for the one I'd never really had. Katie was amazing through all of it. She never pushed me to talk or to feel a certain way. She just stayed present, kept loving me, kept reminding me that I was worth more than how my parents had treated me. Thanksgiving approached. Katie's family invited us to their place, a big, chaotic gathering with aunts and uncles and cousins everywhere. I'd gotten an email from my mother inviting us to their Thanksgiving dinner. The email was carefully worded, neutral, like nothing had happened. I sent back a polite decline. Katie and I would be with her family this year. My mother's response was short. I understand. But I could feel the hurt in those two words. The accusation. I was the one breaking tradition. I was the one pulling away. Never mind that they'd broken something far more fundamental first. Thanksgiving at Katie's family house was warm and loud, and exactly what I needed. Her grandmother cornered me in the kitchen and told me in her no-nonsense way that my parents were fools if they couldn't see what a good man I was. I hugged her hard and felt tears prick my eyes. Christmas came next. Another email invitation from my parents. Another polite decline from me. We spent Christmas morning in our apartment, just Katie and me, drinking coffee and opening presents in our pajamas. Then we drove to her parents' house for dinner. My parents sent gifts, expensive ones. A new watch for me, a designer handbag for Katie. Guilt gifts, Katie called them. We talked about what to do with them and finally decided to donate them. Keeping them felt like accepting an apology that hadn't been offered. The new year arrived. January brought cold weather and quiet contemplation. Katie and I settled into married life, figuring out our rhythms, making plans for the future. We talked about buying a house, about maybe starting a family in a few years. Then, in early January, my phone rang with a number I didn't expect. Derek. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since his text message after the wedding, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked up. Derek's voice was different, subdued, lacking his usual cocky energy. He asked if we could talk. Really talk. I told him I was listening. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking since the Europe trip. The trip had been awful, he admitted. Not just because of the food poisoning and the lost wallet, but because of Mom and Dad. They'd been stressed the entire time. worried about money, arguing with each other, dealing with his problems. It hadn't been the bonding experience he'd imagined. Then he said something that surprised me. He'd overheard our parents talking one night after they got back. They'd been in their bedroom, thinking he was asleep, but he'd heard them through the wall. They'd been talking about me, about the wedding, about how badly they'd handled everything. Derek's voice got quieter. I didn't realize how much they favored me until I heard Mom crying about losing you. I didn't say anything. I waited. Derek continued. I always knew they gave me more attention, but I told myself it was because I needed it more, because I was struggling, and you had everything figured out. He paused. But that wasn't fair to you, was it? No, I said simply. It wasn't. Derek took a breath. I'm sorry, Rufus. I'm sorry I booked that trip. I did know about your wedding. I just didn't think it mattered that much. I thought you'd be fine either way. I didn't think about what it would mean to you. The apology sat between us. I believed he meant it, but meaning it didn't undo the damage. I appreciate you saying that, I told him. But you were right about one thing. I was fine either way. I had a perfect wedding day without any of you there. And that's something I had to learn, that I could be happy without waiting for you all to care. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm moving out, getting my own place. I found a job, accounting, nothing fancy, but it's stable. I can't keep living off Mom and Dad. It's not good for any of us. I felt a flicker of something. Not quite hope, but maybe respect. That's good, Derek, really. I want to try to fix things between us, he said. I know I don't deserve it, but you're my brother, and I've been a terrible one. I thought about it. Thought about whether I wanted to let him back in. It'll take time, I finally said. And I need to see real change, not just words. I understand, Derek said. I'll prove it to you, however long it takes. We talked for a few more minutes, then said goodbye. When I hung up, Katie was watching me from the kitchen doorway. Derek? She asked. I nodded and told her about the conversation. She listened carefully, then asked how I felt about it. I don't know yet, I admitted. But maybe there's a chance he actually means it this time. 2 weeks later, my mother called. I saw her name on the screen and felt my stomach tighten, but something made me answer. Her voice was different too, smaller, uncertain. She asked if she could talk to me. Really talk. I said okay. She told me she'd been in therapy. Her and my father both. Couples counseling. Their therapist had helped them see patterns in how they'd raised us. How they'd always made excuses for Derek and expected me to just handle things on my own. My mother's voice broke. I failed you, Rufus. I see that now. I failed you over and over again, and I made excuses every time because it was easier than admitting I was wrong. I didn't rush to comfort her. I let her sit with it. I don't expect you to forgive me, she continued. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to try to make things right. But I need you to know that I finally understand. I understand what I did, what we did. And I'm so sorry. The apology was raw and real, different from the defensive justifications at the cafe. This felt genuine. That's a start, I said carefully. But I need more than understanding. I need things to actually change. I know, my mother said. I want to try. If you'll let me, can we maybe meet sometimes? Have dinner? Just to talk? I thought about it. Katie was watching me, leaving the decision entirely up to me. I took a breath. Supervised dinners, I said. Katie will be there, and we start slow. Once a month maybe. And if you slip back into old patterns, I'm done. No more chances. Okay, my mother said quickly. Yes, whatever you need. Thank you, Rufus. Thank you for even considering it. We set up a dinner for the following week, a casual restaurant, neutral territory. When we hung up, I felt exhausted but also something else. Not hope exactly, but maybe possibility. The dinner was awkward. My father was stiff, clearly uncomfortable but trying. My mother was overly eager, asking questions about my work and actually listening to the answers. Katie sat beside me, a quiet presence of support. I'm not blaming you, I said. I'm holding you accountable. There's a difference. It was strange and uncomfortable and nothing like the easy warmth of dinners at Katie's family house. But it was different from before. That was something. Over the next few months, we met monthly. Slowly, carefully. My parents started showing up in small ways. They remembered important dates. They called just to talk, not because they needed something. They asked about our lives and actually listened. My father told me one night, after a few glasses of wine, that he was ashamed of how he'd treated me, that he'd let work consume him and let my mother handle the emotional labor of parenting, and she'd poured all that energy into Derek because he'd demanded it loudly while I'd managed quietly on my own. It wasn't an excuse. It was an explanation. And somehow, that mattered. Then, in February, Katie and I got news that changed everything. She was pregnant. We were thrilled and terrified in equal measure. We hadn't been trying, but we hadn't been preventing either. The pregnancy felt like a gift, a sign that we were ready for this next chapter. When we told Katie's parents, they cried happy tears and immediately started planning, talking about grandparent names and baby rooms and all the ways they'd help. Telling my parents was harder. I called my mother, Katie beside me. I told her the news and waited. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then her voice came through, thick with emotion. Can we be part of this child's life? It was the right question. Not assuming. Asking. I looked at Katie. She nodded. If you show up consistently, I said. Really show up. Not just when it's convenient. Not just when Derek doesn't need something. If you can do that, then yes. My mother's voice was fervent. We will. I promise. I know you've heard promises before, but this time will be different. I need to see actions, I said. Not just words. You will, my father said. He must have been on speakerphone. We won't let you down this time. I didn't say I believed them, but I was willing to give them the chance to prove it. And slowly, month by month, they did. They called weekly, checking on Katie's health, asking about doctor's appointments. They offered help in concrete ways, sent care packages with things for the baby. My mother started knitting tiny blankets and booties. My father researched car seats and safety standards. Derek got his apartment, started his accounting job, and actually stuck with it. He checked in regularly, asked about the pregnancy, sent funny text messages that made me laugh. He was trying, really trying. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when old patterns emerged, when my parents focused too much on Derek's minor problems, or when they said something that revealed they still didn't fully get it. But they were trying. And that was more than they'd ever done before. October came around again. 1 year since our wedding. Katie was very pregnant now, her belly round and full, the baby due in just a few weeks. We'd found out we were having a boy. Katie joked that he was destined to be born in October, like our marriage. We'd planned a quiet anniversary dinner, just the two of us. But the baby had other plans. Katie's water broke 2 weeks early, on the morning of October 14th. Our anniversary, the hospital was chaos and calm at the same time. Nurses moving efficiently, machines beeping, Katie breathing through contractions. I held her hand and tried not to panic. She was amazing, strong and focused even through the pain. I'm not blaming you, I said. I'm holding you accountable. There's a difference. I'd called Katie's parents too, of course. Sharon and Tom were there within an hour, bringing coffee and encouraging words and that steady, loving presence they'd always offered. When my parents arrived, I watched them carefully, looking for signs that this was too much, that they'd fade into the background like they always had. But they didn't. They sat in the waiting room with Katie's parents, making small talk, looking genuinely anxious and excited. Labor took 14 hours, long and exhausting. Katie was a warrior through all of it. Finally, at 11:43 on the night of October 14th, our son was born. They placed him on Katie's chest, and I fell in love instantly. This tiny, perfect human we'd made together. He had Katie's nose and my dark hair and lungs that worked impressively well based on his immediate wailing. We named him Henry Thomas. Katie's dad's middle name and my middle name combined. A bridge between our families. When they'd cleaned him up and Katie was resting, the nurses asked if we wanted to let family in to meet him. Katie looked at me, leaving the choice to mine. I nodded. Our parents came in together, quiet and reverent. Sharon went to Katie first, kissing her forehead, telling her how proud she was. Tom stood beside me, looking at Henry with wonder. Then my parents approached. My mother's eyes were full of tears. She looked at Katie, not presuming, and asked softly, "Can I hold him?" Katie nodded. My mother washed her hands carefully, then took Henry with the gentle confidence of someone who'd done this before. She looked down at him, and tears spilled over. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "Absolutely beautiful." My father came to stand beside her, looking at his grandson. He reached out a finger, and Henry's tiny hand wrapped around it reflexively. Something passed over my dad's face. Regret, maybe. Or realization. He looked up at me, still holding Henry's hand. "I'm sorry I wasn't this present for you." The words hung in the air. I looked at this man who'd been mostly absent from my life, who'd chosen work and comfort over connection, who'd let me raise myself while pouring everything into my brother. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. It wasn't forgiveness, not complete, but it was acknowledgement. My mother looked at me too, Henry cradled in her arms. "We miss so much with you. Your whole childhood. All your big moments. Your wedding." Her voice cracked. "I can't get those back. But if you'll let us, we want to be here for Henry. And for you. Really here." Katie reached for my hand. I squeezed it. "You're here now," I said. "That's what matters." Over the next few weeks, my parents showed up. They came to the hospital every day we were there. They helped set up the nursery at home. My mother brought meals. My father installed the car seat with meticulous care. They listened when Katie and I talked about our parenting plans and didn't try to override us with their own ideas. Derek came to meet Henry too, bringing a stuffed giraffe and looking genuinely moved when he held his nephew. "I'm going to be a better uncle than I was a brother," he said quietly. "I promise." Time passed. Weeks turned into months. Henry grew and changed, learning to smile, to laugh, to recognize faces. My parents came over weekly, respectful of boundaries, helpful without being overbearing. They were learning, slowly, what it meant to truly show up. One evening in late December, when Henry was 2 months old, we hosted a small family dinner. My parents, Katie's parents, Derek. Our first real family gathering since everything had happened. I watched my mother playing with Henry, my father helping Derek set the table, Katie's parents easy and comfortable with everyone. It wasn't perfect. The wounds from the past hadn't fully healed and maybe never would. But it was better. Different. After dinner, my parents helped clean up without being asked. They didn't overstay. When they were leaving, my father pulled me aside. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving us another chance, for letting us be part of Henry's life, part of your life." I nodded. "You're doing the work. That's what I needed to see." After everyone left, Katie and I sat on the couch, Henry asleep in his bassinet beside us. The house was quiet, the Christmas tree lights twinkling softly. "How do you feel?" Katie asked, her head on my shoulder. I thought about it, about the wedding, the confrontation, the slow rebuilding, about my parents missing one of the most important days of my life, and how that had forced everything into the open. "I feel like I finally taught them how I needed to be treated," I said. "It took losing me for them to see me. And while I'm glad they're trying now, I'll never forget what it took to get here." Katie nodded against my shoulder. "You stood up for yourself. That's huge." I looked at the wedding photo on our wall, the one from our perfect day. Katie and I grinning at each other, surrounded by people who'd chosen to be there. "I learned something important," I said. "That standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary." Katie lifted her head to look at me. "What else did you learn?" I thought about it, really thought about all of it. The pain of being unseen, the courage it took to demand better, the rebuilding that was possible when people were willing to do the work. "I learned that you teach people how to treat you," I said slowly. "And for years, I taught my parents that they could put me last, and I'd still show up. I taught them that my needs didn't matter as much as Derek's wants. And they believed me because I kept proving it was true." Katie took my hand, waiting for me to continue. "When they chose Derek's vacation over my wedding, it hurt. But it also freed me. Because I finally stopped waiting for them to choose me and chose myself instead. I got married surrounded by people who truly loved me. And that was enough. It had to be enough. I looked at Henry, sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of all the complicated family dynamics he'd been born into. It took them losing me to finally see me, to understand that their actions had consequences, real ones. And while I'm willing to let them try to make amends, while I want Henry to know his grandparents, I'll never again wait for someone to choose me when I can choose myself. Katie squeezed my hand. The family you build matters just as much as the family you're born into. Sometimes more, I agreed. My wedding day taught me that the people who show up when it matters are the people who deserve a place in your life. Everyone else is optional. My parents were optional. They chose not to be there. And I chose to be happy anyway. I looked at Katie, at our son, at the life we'd built together. You cannot wait for others to validate your worth. You have to know it yourself and demand it from those around you. Boundaries are love. Accountability is respect. And the life you build is more important than the approval you seek. Katie smiled, tears in her eyes. Look at you, all wise and grown up. I laughed. Painful lessons stick with you. Henry stirred in his sleep, making those tiny baby noises that still amazed me. I reached over to adjust his blanket. This perfect little person who represented hope and new beginnings. My parents missed my wedding because they made a choice, I said quietly. That choice had consequences. They're living with those consequences now, working to rebuild what they broke. And I'm letting them try because people can change if they're willing to do the work. But I'll never forget what it took to get here. And I'll make sure Henry grows up knowing he's chosen, that he matters, that his big moments are worth showing up for. Katie leaned against me again. He's lucky to have you as his dad. I looked at our wedding photo one more time, at that moment of pure joy captured forever. I'm lucky too. Lucky to have found you. Lucky to have built a life where I'm surrounded by people who choose me every single day. That's what family is supposed to be. Not obligation, not guilt, just love and presence, and choosing each other, over and over again. The Christmas lights twinkled. Henry slept. Katie's warmth pressed against my side. Outside, snow had started to fall, soft and quiet. Inside, we were safe and whole and chosen, and that was everything. I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who didn't prioritize you? Have you ever had to set boundaries with people you love, even when it was painful? How did you find the courage to choose yourself when everyone expected you to just accept less? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that your worth doesn't depend on others recognizing it, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength, setting boundaries, and building the life you deserve. And share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to demand better from the people who are supposed to love you. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that you deserve to be chosen, to be celebrated, to matter. The people who truly love you will show up when it counts. And the ones who don't? Well, you'll be okay without them. Maybe even better than okay. Take care of yourselves. Choose people who choose you. And remember that the family you build is just as valid and important as the family you were born into. Sometimes more so.